that. Hello everybody, welcome to Imray Live. I hope you can see me and I do hope you can hear me, and I would find it very reassuring if somebody could send me a greetings. Hello, thank you Peter, and thank you Peter and Joe. It's nice to know that somebody's there and we're almost ready to go. I've been told I have to wait a few moments to allow more people to join us. And it's nice to see that Joe and Mark has come to see us. And Peter said we're clear. That's good. We're ready to go. Welcome to Imray Live. My name is Judith Grimwade. I have been a member of the Cruising Association since 1987, and I now chair the Almanac group. I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about how Imray and the Cruising Association joined forces to produce the Cruising Almanac. I have my copy here. Here we are. And I'll tell you a little bit about the history of the CA and its production of cruising information, and how we go about editing the Cruising Almanac. Imray worked in the publication and the production of nautical information for the professional sailors for a long time, and they joined with Laurie and Norrie and Wilson in 1904, shortly before the Cruising Association was started. The Cruising Association began its life in response to a letter written to Yachting Weekly about the extortionate rates that boatmen charge for services to visiting cruisers. It remarked in his letter that it cost as much as 2 shillings, which is 10 pence in today's money, to be rowed between the shore and a boat. And the suggestion was that if an association of cruising yachtsmen could be formed, similar to motoring clubs and cycling organisations, they could negotiate better rates and therefore save people money. We cruisers do like to save money. It was stressed that this would not be a yacht club, it would be an association. There's a subtle difference which actually I don't really understand. A group of people met together in London in response to that letter, and a few months later they held their first general meeting, and in 1909 they produced a yearbook, and the yearbook contained the list of the names of all the members and their boats, the names of the boatmen, the Dover tide table, and information on 87 ports or anchorages. This gave passage notes and sailing directions to help people find these anchorages. They must have continued to work exceedingly hard, because in 1912 the yearbook had dropped the tide tables but included information on 470 locations, and these were not confined to the United Kingdom. There was an entry for Dunkirk which remarked that rats in Brittany are to be found as far south as the River Penrith. I would like to say I have never seen a rat in Brittany. And the honorary local representative for Burnham contributed the fact that there were a number of really useful sailing ladies joining the ranks of yachting women. Work on the yearbook continued until 1920, when the decision must have been taken to move all the sailing and the nautical information into a separate publication, and that actually produced the Cruising Association Handbook. It contained a general introduction with information on astronavigation, man overboard drills and cookery. Given that this was published in 1920 after World War I think it's quite likely the cookery section was a result of it being more difficult to find a paid hand. Harbour information sorry about that, harbour information gave the details of early closing days, where water could be obtained, and its quality. There wasn't a third edition until 1951, and if you have looked on the Imray website, there is a very nice example of what the pages looked like in the 1961 edition of the handbook, and there's a lovely chart which had been hand-drawn for Bembridge. This was actually, I think, the first example of a concrete arrangement, because actually Imray printed that handbook for us. In 1971, this Cruising Association began issuing quarterly corrections and also a more methodical method of collecting information from the membership in the form of cruising reports, which in those days would have been handwritten and posted to CA House, where other members who were visiting the library could consult them. Since then, we've actually modernized the method and we use an app. So we have far more cruising reports on a much wider range of locations, and in fact our number of reports is now in the 10,000. And you don't need to go to CA House, you just open the app. In 1991, the publication of that year actually used colour plans. And it also marked quite a big change in the way people cruised. In the 70s and the 80s, when I started sailing, I actually remember the Cruising Association Handbook as being one of the go-to publications. And when my husband and I married in 1982, we did put it at the top of our wedding present list. And we did, I'm glad to say, receive a copy. We also, I'm sorry to say, disposed of it some 10 or so years later as being now out of date. And had I known then that I would be not only a member of the Cruising Association, but involved with the production of the Almanac and talking to you today, well, I'd have kept it and I would have had some other resources to share with you. But we never know what fate's going to bring to us, do we? The 80s and 90s were times of great change. Boats were now being designed with a greater degree of comfort. There were more instruments available to us, especially GPS. There were more publications on the market, the information was easier to find, and it was a time for a change. The days of the handbook were actually coming to an end. And I wonder if anybody has got any questions before I go any further. No? Okay. I'll keep an eye on the comments, and if the questions come in, we'll see what we can do, and I'll try and answer them. To produce a different type of publication, the Cruising Association was going to have to up its game, and it is unlikely, I think, that we could have done it without finding a partner like Imray, because Imray have the expertise and the knowledge about publishing nautical information. They produce charts, which are a very important part of the handbook, and therefore the idea was to find another partner, and fortunately we have become Imray's partner with the production of the Cruising Almanac. The scope of the Almanac stretches from Bergen down to Gibraltar on mainland mainland Europe, and we also, of course, cover all the coasts of the United Kingdom, the Channel Islands, Ireland, the Isle of Man, and Scillies. So, the book has been produced in a size and a format with the separately bound tide tables to make it easy to be used on a small boat and perhaps in less than ideal sailing conditions. So how do we work? Well, the Cruising Association is responsible for the text, and we have experts within our membership who help us with the general introduction. especially our regulatory and technical services team. We have a team of regional editors who produce the information regarding the ports and the passage information. And many of us actually sail and cruise extensively within our own areas. We work under the guidance of an honorary editor. Imray produces all the tide tables and the tidal informations. They produce the plans, and they're responsible for marketing and the production process. As experts in the production of nautical information, they are they're one of the best. They are the best, actually. So we're able to use the strengths of both organisations. There's an extensive editing process. Our honorary editor works very closely with Imray and always visits them at least once a year. We meet in October when everybody comes back from sailing, and we reflect upon what went well, what didn't, what needs to be changed. We consider the implications of changes, future legislation and things like that, and we receive the timetable for the coming issue. We look to our regulatory and technical services people to help us with information on items such as Brexit, COVID-19, red diesel, the likely changes that we're going to have to face for reporting. You will note that the low codes are already included in the almanac. And we receive the timetable for the next issue. The sources of information are quite extensive. We consult all the notices to mariners relating to our areas and our charts. We get information from harbour masters, marina managers, cruising reports from our own membership, and of course we do get some information from our readership. Personal experience is also very important, because when you are cruising, especially in a foreign area, by being on the ground or having your keel in the water, you do get that extra bit of information that comes from really good local knowledge. We also, of course, look at the cumulative corrections, websites, and other materials such as locally produced almanacs and cruising information. The editing program lasts from about October through till May, and we have several several goes at doing this. We start with the pages from the previous almanac, and in the autumn we gather together all our information, we mark up our pages, we collect all the changes that are needed to be made to the plans, and these are sent first to the honorary editor, who looks at it all for everybody's work. He's an ex-schoolmaster, so he's good at checking and marking work. And he sends it off to Imray, and the Imray team then start preparing the first proofs for the coming edition. They are returned to us in March. In fact, most of us have just finished working on them, and we repeat the editing process, collecting more information, checking more details, consulting notices to mariners, marking up again, and the pages are then returned to Imray for the last part of the process, which is the final check by the editor before everything goes off to the printers in time for the Southampton boat show. It's also in time for us to go cruising and to find out more useful information needed to inform the next edition of the Almanac. When I became the editor for Western France, I realized that the information for the ports south of the Gironde was not as accurate as it could be. But I didn't feel I had the knowledge or the certainty that I could re-edit this information without actually visiting the ports. So I then suggested to my husband that our next summer cruise, and we were then based in Rochefort, which is quite close to the Gironde, relatively speaking, that we should not turn towards northern Brittany, but we should make our way down to the Spanish border by way of calling in at Arcachon, Cap-Breton, Anglet, and Saint-Jean-de-Luz. Now, I have to say he had severe reservations about this because he had read all the pilot information and all the warnings about the risks you take if you follow the French coast down to the Spanish border. It's about 120 miles between ports of safety. But on the other hand, if the warnings say not in an onshore wind, not in swells above 2 meters, then if you find you're in a situation where you have northwesterly or specifically northeasterly winds and very little swell, and you've got your timing right at the bar to enter the Bay of Arcachon, you have a good chance of getting in without any worries. So we made our way down to Rayon on the Gironde and started to look at tidal calculations. The buoys at Arcachon are not marked for the entrance at all. There are no lights, there's no radar reflector. You really do have to do this by vision. So we had to arrive in daylight, which meant a nighttime passage through the southern pass of the Gironde River, which I have to say I suggest to people they do not do this for the first time in the dark. In fact, they don't do it in the dark at all. But we had to leave Rayon as daylight was fading, so we did ignore the wisdom of the book. We actually went quite safely through the passage. I think the chart plotter helped a great deal, and set sail down for Arcachon to arrive there about 11:30 in the morning, which is, I think if my notes are correct, 2.5 hours before high water Arcachon itself, which is the advised time to make an entrance. And the entrance was quite clear. We followed the buoys. We ignored the chart plotter, which is just as good because its passage actually took us into very shallow water and got into Arcachon and spent 2 delightful nights there. We had to leave in time to exit late afternoon 2 days later, which meant another night passage down to Cap-Breton, and we found that the range would be active that afternoon, but fortunately they would have finished their work before we approached their firing area. Cap-Breton, I think, has an even more delicate entrance than Arcachon in that it is exceedingly narrow. The southern estacade has an outward mark with a light on it, and then the next 30 meters they're underwater. So you have to kind of guess where your southern wall is. But we managed to go in the dark, and we tied up in the marina without any problems and saved ourselves a night's mooring fee, because in France, if you arrive after midnight, you don't pay for that day. They also gave us a bottle of wine and a goodie bag, which was really a nice reward for a difficult entrance. Anglet is fairly easy, so long as the onshore conditions are fairly moderate. The only problem we found there were the fishermen who laid their nets across the entrance, across the channel approach to the marina. And the best place of all, of course, was Saint-Jean-de-Luz, right in the corner where people tell you you may get embayed, but we didn't, where you can enjoy exquisite architecture, fabulous beaches, and the surroundings of the Pyrenees. A very beautiful place indeed. So it goes to show that it is possible to go into most places, even despite what we say in the books, so long as you do wait for the right conditions and the right timing. It's a bit like a metaphor for life, isn't it? If you're in the right place at the right time, in the right conditions, it's going to be all right. But it's not all right at the moment, is it? But that's another story. Anybody like to ask any questions? Total silence, unless something's going wrong. Any comments? No? Ah. Oh, sorry, it's you have to excuse the learner. Matthew Knightley asks, how soon after the publishing of a new almanac do you all get to work on the next? Well, we publish in September and we start work on the next one in the following month, so that's quite quickly. And I'm sorry, but there seems to be buffering noises and background noises and hedge cutters, and it's not here unless it's my the fan on my computers, so I do apologize for that. And Peter says they can hear a hedge cutter or whatever. I just wonder if you're picking up the noises occasionally we get from the ships in Harwich Harbour. I can't do anything about that one either, Peter. I'm sorry. And it's nice to have a note from Sarah Mand and Tim. Thank you for feeding back. One thing we've learnt today is that sailing has been allowed to begin in the department of the Morbihan. So it does look as if France is starting to open up. Well, I seem to have stunned you all in silence, for which I apologise, but I think it's time to end the video. I hope you all enjoy going sailing as soon as possible, and when you do, you have fair winds and calm waters. Bye bye.